She fought the magnetic pull with every ounce of royal will, but his unexpected presence in her gilded cage weakened her resolve like desert sun on ice. Hello, and a warm welcome to all of you amazing viewers. I'm your storyteller Morgan, and I hope this message finds you well. Before we dive into this incredible journey, if you enjoy stories about forbidden romance, soul-deep connections, and how a single glance can unravel a lifetime of control, you've come to the right place. If you want to experience a soul-stirring, slow-burn love story that will stay with you long after, be sure to watch until the very end. You won't want to miss a single moment. It's going to be so worth it. So if you haven't yet, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, and let's dive into this unforgettable story together. Chapter 1. The Citadel of Amun-Ra brooded under the midday sun, a fortress of honeyed sandstone and cool veined marble carved into the spine of a desert mountain. From her private balcony, a shelf of alabaster jutting high above the central courtyard, Queen Isetnofret surveyed her domain. Below, the intricate dance of court unfolded. Advisors in crisp linen moved with measured steps. Servants flowed like silent shadows carrying trays of fruit, cooled in deep cisterns. Guards stood rigid as obsidian statues at arched gateways. Order, control, precision. These were the pillars upon which her reign rested, as unyielding as the citadel walls. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the faint, familiar scents of dust, sun-baked stone, and the distant dry perfume of the desert beyond the irrigated gardens. It was a scent she wore like her crown, a constant reminder of power and isolation. Isetnofret herself was a study in contained power. Tall, with skin like polished obsidian catching the light, her features were carved with regal severity, high cheekbones, a strong jawline softened only slightly by the fullness of her lips, currently pressed into a thin line of concentration. Her eyes, the deep, rich brown of fertile earth after rare rain, missed nothing. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk, severe in its cut, the only adornment a heavy pectoral collar of gold and lapis lazuli resting against her sternum. The weight was familiar, grounding. She breathed in, the air cool and dry in her nostrils, tasting the faint metallic tang of authority that always seemed to linger in her private spaces. Below, the predictable rhythm soothed her. Then, a discordant note, movement near the stables caught her eye. Not the usual bustling of grooms, but a single figure working with a magnificent, newly acquired stallion, a beast of midnight hide and restless energy, known for its unpredictable temper. The horse danced sideways, eyes rolling white, hooves striking sparks on the flagstones. The figure holding the lead rope wasn't shrinking back. He moved with the animal, fluidly, patiently, his body a counterpoint to the stallion's panic. Sunlight caught hair the color of pale, sun-bleached wheat, startlingly bright against the dark wood of the stable door and the dun-colored stone. Kalen, the new head stablemaster, an outsider, rumored to be noble-born from some distant war-torn northern land, though he bore the title lightly, his hands calloused, his bearing unassuming. Isetnofret's gaze sharpened. She watched as Kalen spoke, his voice too low to carry to her balcony, but the cadence was calm, rhythmic. He didn't force, he guided. His hands, large and capable even from this distance, moved with surprising delicacy over the stallion's quivering neck. There was an ease to him, a quiet competence that seemed to radiate outward, calming the very air around the skittish animal. It was efficient, admirable even. Yet as she watched the play of muscle beneath his simple linen tunic, the way the sunlight gilded the curve of his shoulder, a strange, unwelcome sensation tightened low in her throat. Not irritation precisely, something warmer, sharper, a flicker of an employee, a functionary, beneath notice. She turned abruptly from the balcony, the cool silk of her gown whispering against her skin as she retreated into the shadowed sanctuary of her chamber. The image, however, the stark lightness of him against the shadowed stone, the quiet intensity of his focus, lingered like an afterimage on her retinas. The scent of sandalwood incense in her room suddenly felt cloying. Days later, the memory still faintly nettled. Isetnofret decided an unannounced inspection of the royal stables was necessary, partly routine diligence, partly something else she refused to name. The transition from the cool, echoing marble halls of the palace wing to the earthy bustle of the stables was jarring. Sunlight streamed through high barred windows, illuminating swirling dust motes. The air thickened, rich with the pungent, comforting smells of hay, warm horseflesh, leather polish, and the underlying tang of manure, a vital animal scent worlds away from the sterile perfumes of court. The rhythmic crunch of hooves on straw, the soft snorts and whickers of the magnificent beasts housed in polished cedar stalls, the low murmur of grooms, it formed a symphony of life that felt almost indecently vibrant. She found Kalen not in an office, but bent over a workbench near the entrance. He was repairing a bridle, his back to her, sunlight catching the gold strands in his hair. Her arrival caused a ripple of tension among the grooms present. They froze, then bowed deeply. Kalen, sensing the shift, straightened and turned. His eyes, she noted with that same unwelcome jolt, were the startling blue of a desert oasis sky seen from afar, clear, deep, and unnervingly direct for a fleeting second before he lowered them respectfully, sketching a bow. "My queen." His voice was low, pleasant, carrying the faint lilt of his northern origins. "An honor, the new Thessalian stallion," Nefret stated, her voice cool, cutting through the stable air like chilled steel. "I trust his integration proceeds." She kept her gaze sweeping the stalls, deliberately avoiding settling on him, though her peripheral vision registered his every movement, the way his worn tunic stretched across broad shoulders as he turned, the smudge of oil on his cheekbone. "Admirably, Your Majesty," Kalen replied. He gestured towards the far stall where the magnificent black beast stood calmly munching hay. Spirit, but no malice, just needed understanding. He picked up the bridle he was working on. "See here?" The bit was poorly fitted, pinching him. Small discomforts make for large rebellions. He held the intricate leatherwork, demonstrating the adjustment with his large, capable hands. They moved with surprising dexterity, strong yet precise. Nefret forced herself to look at the bridle, not the hands. Understanding requires time. Time is a luxury seldom afforded in matters of security. "Respectfully, Majesty," Kalen said, his tone mild but holding a thread of quiet conviction. "A moment spent understanding often saves hours spent controlling or repairing damage." He met her eyes then, just for a heartbeat. The blue was intense, intelligent, not challenging, but confident. A frightened creature, even a powerful one, is rarely predictable. Calm it, and its strength becomes an asset, not a threat. He returned his attention to the bridle buckle, his fingers working the stiff leather. "Like this joint. Force it, it breaks. Ease it with oil. Apply pressure, just so." There was a soft click as the buckle slid smoothly into place. "It holds." The air between them felt thick, suddenly charged. Was he still talking about horses? Nefret became acutely aware of the heat radiating from his body, the scent of sun-warmed leather and clean sweat that clung to him, mixing with the hay and horse. It was a disturbingly primal smell. She noticed the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. Did they come from squinting in the sun? Smiling. The thought was intrusive. Her own skin felt too tight, a hum of awareness vibrating beneath the cool silk of her gown. His words, simple and practical, seemed layered with meaning she refused to decipher. "Efficiency is commendable, stablemaster," she said, her voice perhaps a fraction tighter than intended. "See that it extends to all your charges. I expect the new chariot team ready for the desert run within the week." She turned to leave, the dismissal clear. "Of course, Your Majesty," Kalen replied, bowing again. "They respond well to patience and the promise of a good run." Was there the faintest ghost of a smile in his voice, a hint of shared understanding about the joy of speed, of freedom? Nefret didn't look back. She walked swiftly out of the stable block, the transition back to the cool marble corridors, feeling like plunging into a still pool. Yet the earthy scents of hay and leather seemed to cling to her clothes, to her skin, an unsettling reminder of the vibrant life she had just left, and the man who embodied it. She felt flushed, a reaction she sternly attributed to the stable's heat. Alone in her chambers later, the silence pressed in, the cool, polished stone of the floor beneath her bare feet, the smooth ebony of her writing desk, the scent of sandalwood, all were familiar anchors, yet Kalen's image intruded. Not just his face, but the sensation of his presence, the startling blue of his eyes meeting hers for that fleeting moment, the contrast of his sun-bright hair against the dark wood, the quiet certainty in his voice as he spoke of understanding frightened creatures, the memory of his hands, large and calloused, yet moving with such delicate precision on the bridle, sparked a treacherous warmth low in her belly. It was an alien feeling, unwelcome and potent. "He is the stablemaster," she reminded herself, gripping the edge of her desk until her knuckles whitened. "An employee, an outsider. His origins are murky, his position transient. He is beneath my notice." She repeated the words like a mantra. Her gaze fell on a pile of scrolls, tax reports from the southern province. Duty, control. She sat down, dipping her reed pen with sharp, precise movements. The scratch of the pen on papyrus became a weapon against the unwelcome thoughts. She wrote with fierce concentration, her script unnaturally sharp, the ink dark and bold. Each stroke was a barricade against the unsettling hum beneath her skin. The cool metallic scent of the ink helped, a little, but the phantom scent of sun-warmed leather and hay lingered in her nostrils, a persistent vital counterpoint to the sterile perfection of her room. The incident in the colonnade days later was a spark landing on dry tinder. The covered walkway lined with fluted sandstone pillars offered a respite from the afternoon glare. Dappled light played on the mosaic floor. Aisette Nefret was returning from an audience, her mind already passing the petitioner's requests, her guards a respectful distance behind. As she rounded a corner, Kalen emerged from an archway leading towards the training grounds. He carried a bundle of clean saddle blankets. Seeing her, he instantly stepped aside, pressing himself against the cool stone wall to give her ample room, bowing his head deeply. "Your Majesty," he murmured. Aisette Nefret continued her measured pace, her gaze fixed straight ahead, yet her senses were hyper-aware. She registered the slight sheen of sweat on his brow from exertion, the clean scent of soap and sun on his skin cutting through the usual leather and horse. As she passed, the flowing silk of her outermost robe, a whisper-thin layer of indigo, drifted on the slight breeze generated by her movement. It almost brushed against the worn leather of his boot. The near contact was electric. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot through her, rooting her to the spot for a fraction of a heartbeat. It wasn't pain, it was pure, raw sensation, a current connecting the point of near touch straight to her core. Her breath hitched, imperceptibly, she hoped. She stopped. Not a full halt, but a stutter in her regal glide. He remained utterly still, bowed low, his face obscured, but she saw it, the rapid, fluttering pulse beating wildly against the tanned skin of his throat, just above the simple cord holding his tunic closed. It hammered against the silence of the colonnade, a frantic drumbeat echoing the sudden, frantic rhythm of her own heart. The air crackled. The dappled light seemed to intensify, highlighting the tension in his still form, the rigid line of her own spine. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, witnesses to the charged silence. No words. None were possible. The space between them, mere inches, felt like a chasm charged with lightning. 1 second, 2, the silence screamed louder than any declaration. Then, with a force of will that felt like lifting a mountain, Aisette Nefret moved. She walked on, her pace resuming, perhaps a shade quicker than before. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The ghost of that near brush burned on her skin, where the silk had fluttered, a brand that no cool marble corridor could soothe. The scent of sun-warmed skin and soap lingered, replacing the sandalwood, a scent that now felt accusingly sterile. Her hands, hidden within the folds of her robe, trembled minutely. The carefully constructed walls of her control felt suddenly, terrifyingly thin. The seed of forbidden attraction, planted on the balcony, watered in the stables, had just been violently shaken by the wind. It was no longer unseen. It was a fracture, deep and dangerous, threatening the very foundations of her icy reign. The citadel walls felt less like protection and more like a gilded cage holding a newly awakened and utterly unwelcome storm. Chapter 2. The cool precision of the citadel corridors offered no refuge. Days bled into one another. Each step Aisette Nefret took echoing the phantom brush of silk against worn leather in the colonnade. The memory was a brand, a constant, low thrum beneath the rigid layers of her composure. She threw herself into the machinery of rule with renewed, almost ferocious intensity. Scrolls piled higher on the ebony desk, audiences stretched longer, her questions sharper, her pronouncements delivered with an icy clarity that left petitioners trembling. She walked the polished halls like a figure carved from obsidian, her midnight blue silks whispering secrets of containment against the marble. The scent of sandalwood became a shield, deliberately intensified, a fragrant barricade against the persistent haunting memory of sun-warmed leather and clean sweat. Yet, the citadel felt different, smaller. The high ceilings seemed to press down. The meticulously ordered spaces felt sterile and lifeless. She found herself avoiding the western wing entirely, where the earthy aroma of the stables could sometimes drift on errant breezes. Yet, paradoxically, she felt drawn to windows offering oblique views of the training grounds or the stable courtyard. It was a weakness she despised, a fissure in her fortress wall. She never lingered long, just enough for a fleeting glimpse of sun-bleached hair, the efficient swing of an axe splitting wood, the calm posture overseeing the exercising of the royal mounts. Kalen moved through his duties with the same quiet competence, seemingly unaffected, which only deepened the knot of frustration and unwanted heat within her. Dusk was her preferred time for the Queen's garden, when the fierce sun relinquished its hold and the desert air cooled, carrying the complex perfume of hundreds of blooms. It was a space of rigid beauty, geometric beds of roses, crimson, ivory, deepest burgundy, bordered by clipped hedges of myrtle, paths of crushed white quartz gleaming in the fading light, order imposed upon nature, control. Tonight, the scent of roses was heavy, almost cloying. Iced Nutfret walked slowly, the quartz crunching softly under her sandals, her fingertips lightly brushing the velvety petals of a deep red bloom. She sought the familiar solace of control, the predictable beauty, but her thoughts were a tangle, replaying the stable inspection, the colonnade, the maddening calm in Kaelin's blue eyes. Rounding a corner, screened by a high trellis, heavy with jasmine, she stopped dead. He was there, kneeling beside one of the far beds, not the roses, but the small, carefully tended section dedicated to rare desert flora. This particular plant was her secret favorite, a spiky, resilient thing, with vicious thorns guarding clusters of tiny, star-shaped flowers the color of twilight, a fragile, unexpected beauty, thriving in harshness. Kaelin was tending it, his back to her. He hadn't heard her approach over the soft sigh of the evening breeze. She watched, frozen. His large, calloused hands, so capable with bridles and axes, were engaged in a task of startling delicacy. He was carefully removing encroaching weeds, his touch gentle, around the plant's thorny base. Then he cupped a cluster of the tiny blooms in his palm, not picking, just cradling them, his head bent as if in reverence. The dying sun caught the gold in his hair, etched the strong line of his profile against the deepening purple sky. The vulnerability of the gesture, the tenderness directed towards this harsh, beautiful thing she cherished, struck her with the force of a physical blow. A wave of longing, fierce and terrifying, crashed over her. It wasn't just desire, it was a profound ache for the simplicity of his focus, the unguarded tenderness he showed this fragile bloom, a tenderness she couldn't remember receiving or allowing herself to feel. It stole her breath, weakened her knees. She swayed, her sandal catching a dry twig hidden beneath the quartz path. The sharp snap shattered the twilight hush. Kaelin's head whipped around, his eyes, wide and startled, met hers. In that unguarded moment, before the shutters of professionalism could slam down, Nofret saw it, a mirror reflecting her own turmoil. Raw, unfiltered vulnerability, a yearning so profound it bordered on pain. It was there, blazing in the depths of his startling blue for a heartbeat, maybe two. Then it vanished, masked by deference. He scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt from his simple trousers, bowing his head. "Your Majesty, forgive me, I didn't hear you approach." His voice was steady, but a faint flush stained his neck. Nofret couldn't speak. The cloying scent of roses suddenly felt suffocating, thick enough to choke on. The sight of his vulnerability, echoing her own, was more terrifying than any rebellion. It laid bare the dangerous precipice she stood upon. She needed to regain control now. "The desert bloom," she managed, her voice sounding strange, thin, to her own ears. "It thrives," a ridiculously mundane question. "It does, Majesty," Kaelin replied, straightening but keeping his gaze respectfully lowered, though she felt its weight. "A stubborn little thing, doesn't ask for much, just a little care and respect for its thorns." He dared a glance up, a ghost of his earlier intensity flickering. "Some of the most beautiful things are also the most fiercely guarded." The words hung in the fragrant air. Was he still talking about the flower? The double meaning vibrated between them, a subtle, dangerous flirtation. Her own thorns felt painfully exposed. She saw a tiny nick on his thumb, likely from the plant's defenses. The sight sent another unwelcome jolt through her. "Indeed," she said, her voice regaining some of its customary ice, though it felt brittle. "One must be cautious not to be lured by beauty into carelessness. Thorns draw blood." She held his gaze for a beat, a silent warning, a reminder of the chasm between them. "See that it continues to receive appropriate care, stablemaster. Nothing more than necessary." The dismissal was clear, cold. "Understood, Your Majesty," he murmured, bowing again. "Only what's necessary, for its survival." There was no insolence in his tone, only a quiet acknowledgement that held layers she refused to peel back. Nofret turned and walked away, her stride swift and purposeful, back towards the citadel's imposing shadow. The scent of the desert bloom, subtle, clean, resilient, seemed to chase her, mingling with the oppressive perfume of roses, a haunting reminder of the wild, untamed thing taking root within her own carefully cultivated walls. The garden, once a sanctuary, now felt like a treacherous landscape. She didn't look back, but the image of him kneeling, cradling the fragile blooms, was seared onto her mind, a silent testament to the deepening fracture in her resolve. The news arrived like a desert storm, sudden,
brutal and chilling. A royal messenger, dust-covered and grim-faced, was ushered into the throne room during the morning audience. The scroll he bore was sealed with the black wax of the northern marches. Iced and Fret received it on the dais, her face the customary mask of regal impassivity. The crack of the seal breaking echoed in the sudden hush. She read the stark lines, the formal script detailing the incursion, the skirmishes escalating towards open conflict, duty, war, concepts as familiar as the weight of her crown. Then the final paragraph, the mustering of levies, the call for all able-bodied men of fighting age, including those within the Citadel's service, and specifically the conscription of Kaelan, son of. The name, northern and unfamiliar, was followed by a string of titles, now rendered meaningless by exile, but confirming the whispered rumors of his hidden lineage. His bloodline demanded he fight. He was to depart with the next contingent, leaving within the week. The parchment didn't tremble in her hand. She made sure of it. Her knuckles, however, turned bone white, where she gripped the edge of the dais beneath the folds of her heavy ceremonial robe. The cool marble beneath her feet felt like ice spreading upwards. The air in the throne room, usually scented with incense and anticipation, turned thin and stale. The faces of the courtiers blurred. A single horrifying image filled her mind. Kaelan, his sun-bright hair dulled by grime, his startling blue eyes extinguished, lying broken on some distant blood-soaked field. The thought was a physical blow, a cold fist closing around her heart. "See that the conscription orders are fulfilled," she stated, her voice cutting through the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the court. It sounded flat, devoid of inflection, even to her own ears. "The northern commander shall have what he requires." She handed the scroll to her vizier without looking at him. Dismissed. The audience ended abruptly. She retreated to her chambers, the familiar route feeling alien, the citadel walls no longer protective but confining, suffocating. The scent of sandalwood was suddenly acrid, nauseating. She stood at her balcony, not seeing the sun-drenched courtyard below, only visions of mud and steel and loss. The carefully constructed edifice of her control felt fragile, cracked by the cold wind blowing from the north. Avoiding the stables became impossible. It was no longer a temptation, but a grim necessity, a vigil. She found herself drawn time and again to the high window overlooking the training grounds where the conscripts drilled. There he was, amongst the others, yet apart. He moved with the same efficient grace he applied to gentling a horse or tending a bloom, fluid, economical, lethally competent. He handled the practice sword and shield with a natural ease that spoke of hidden training, a past he never discussed. Watching him, a fierce protective rage warred with the chilling dread within her. He didn't look doomed. He looked focused, resigned, perhaps. He glanced up once during a break, his gaze sweeping the citadel walls. Did it linger for a fraction on her window? She stepped back swiftly into the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. The thought of him gone, erased by the brutal machinery of war, was an abyss opening at her feet. The fracture in her resolve wasn't just deepening, it was threatening to split her world apart. The night before the contingent's departure hung heavy over the citadel. A formal banquet was decreed, not celebration but grim ritual. A send-off for the men bound for the meat grinder of the north. The great hall was lit by 100 oil lamps, casting flickering shadows on the painted walls depicting ancient victories. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meats, spiced wine, and the underlying tension of impending loss. Low conversations hummed, punctuated by forced laughter that rang hollow. Isenofret sat on the dais, a figure of frozen majesty. She wore a gown of silver-threaded grey, like captured moonlight and ashes. Her hair was coiled severely, the heavy lapis collar a cold weight against her skin. She ate little, spoke less, her gaze sweeping the hall with detached regality. Her guards stood like statues behind her. Below, the conscripts sat together at long tables, a sea of nervous energy and stoic faces in simple gear. Among them, Kaelan stood out, not just because of his fair hair, but because of the quiet stillness that surrounded him. He wasn't joking raucously like some, nor drowning his fears in wine like others. He sat straight, observing, a contained intensity about him. She felt the pull, a physical magnetism drawing her gaze to him again and again. It was a dangerous indulgence, a crack in her icy facade. She forced her eyes away, focusing on the vizier droning about grain supplies, on the intricate pattern of the tablecloth. But inevitably, her gaze drifted back. And then, across the smoky, crowded expanse of the hall, their eyes met. Time stopped. The drone of voices, the clatter of plates, the mournful notes of the court musicians, all faded into a muffled silence. The 100 lamps seemed to focus their light solely on the space between them. He wasn't bowing, wasn't looking away. He held her gaze, his blue eyes stripped bare. In them, she saw no fear of battle, no resentment of his fate. Instead, she saw a profound, aching sorrow, and beneath it, a question, a raw, unspoken question, directed solely at her. It asked about the moments in the stables, the near touch in the colonnade, the shared silence over the desert bloom. It asked if any of it had been real, if he had been real to her, beyond his station, beyond his function. It was a look that bypassed her crown, her title, and sought the woman beneath. The intensity was devastating. It felt like being flayed open, her carefully guarded secrets laid bare under that unwavering blue gaze. Her breath caught, a sharp, painful intake. Her composure, that brittle shell she'd reinforced for weeks, threatened to shatter then and there. The urge to look away, to rebuild the walls, was overwhelming. He is beneath you. He is leaving. He will die. The cold mantras failed. With a supreme effort that felt like tearing her own skin, she broke the connection. She looked down at her plate, at the congealing food, her vision blurring. She picked up her wine goblet, her hand trembling so minutely, only she could feel it. She took a sip, the wine tasting like vinegar. The noise of the hall rushed back, a cacophony that mocked the silent communion that had just occurred. She didn't look in his direction again, for the rest of the interminable evening, but the imprint of his sorrowful, questioning gaze burned hotter than any lamp in the hall. Later, in the profound silence of her private solar, the dam finally began to break. The formal robes were discarded, lying in a pool of silver-gray silk on the cool floor. She wore only a thin linen shift, pacing like a caged animal before the large window that looked out over the moon-washed desert. The scent of the banquet, meat and wine and smoke, still clung faintly, but it was overwhelmed by something else. On a low table of polished ebony, bathed in a shaft of moonlight, stood a single perfect stem, the desert bloom. Its tiny star-shaped twilight flowers were fully open, exuding their subtle, clean, resilient fragrance. It filled the room, a scent both achingly familiar and devastatingly potent. He had sent it, not delivered by a servant during the feast, but placed here, in this most private space, a silent message, a farewell, a reminder of the moment in the garden when he'd cradled its fragile beauty, when she'd seen the vulnerability in his eyes that mirrored her own. She stopped pacing, staring at the bloom. The moonlight seemed to caress its delicate petals. The image of Kalen in the banquet hall, his sorrowful gaze holding hers captive, fused with the memory of his hands tending this very plant. The controlled efficiency of his movements on the training ground, the quiet acceptance of his fate, and beneath it all, that unspoken question, "Did you see me?" The iron resolve, the fortress of control she had spent a lifetime building, didn't just crack, it shattered, not with a roar, but with a silent seismic collapse deep within her soul. The fear of scandal, the weight of duty, the gulf of station, the specter of war and death, they all crumbled to dust before a tidal wave of pure, primal need. It wasn't just desire, though that molten core was undeniable. It was a desperate, terrifying need for connection, for him, to touch the reality of him, the warmth and life, before the abyss of war swallowed him whole. To answer the question in his eyes, not with words but with her presence, her touch. Reason screamed its warnings, but its voice was drowned out by the roar of this newfound, terrifying imperative. The scent of the desert bloom, pure and unexpected, filled her lungs, her being. It was the scent of him, of the wild resilience she craved, of the fragile beauty she wanted to protect, to possess, even for just one stolen moment. She looked towards the door, then back at the bloom glowing in the moonlight. The citadel slept, the contingent left at dawn. Time was a thread fraying rapidly. The thought of him riding away, of never knowing the answer to his silent question, of never feeling his touch, it was unendurable. With a breath that was half sob, half surrender, Isetnofret moved, not as the queen, but as a woman stripped bare by longing. She didn't call for a cloak, she didn't think, she acted on pure, desperate instinct. Her bare feet made no sound on the cool marble as she slipped from her solar, a pale ghost in the moonlit corridors, drawn by an invisible, irresistible pull towards the stables, towards the man whose quiet presence had fractured her world, and whose imminent departure threatened to shatter it completely. The scent of the desert bloom followed her, a silent herald of the conflagration to come.
Chapter 3. The moonlit corridors of the citadel were a river of cold silver, flowing past sleeping doorways and silent guard posts. Isetnofret moved through them like a phantom, barefoot on the chill marble, the thin linen shift she wore, offering no barrier against the night air or the feverish heat blooming within her. The scent of the desert bloom, that pure, heartbreaking fragrance, seemed to cling to her skin, a fragrant ghost, leading her onward. Reason, duty, the icy walls of her reign, they lay shattered behind her in the solar, crushed under the weight of a need so profound it felt like madness. The image of Kalen's sorrowful gaze across the banquet hall, the silent question burning in his blue eyes, propelled her forward. "Did you see me?" she had to answer, before the dawn stole him away to the northern abyss. The transition from the hushed, perfumed elegance of the palace wing to the earthy reality of the stables was a plunge into another world. The heavy oak door groaned softly as she pushed it open. The air inside was thick, warm, and alive, the rich pungent smells of hay, horses, leather, and animal musk, replacing the sterile scent of sandalwood. Moonlight streamed through the high barred windows, painting silver stripes on the worn stone floor and the polished wood of the stalls. The horses shifted in their sleep, soft snorts, and the rustle of straw the only sounds breaking the profound quiet. The familiar scent of kaolin, sun-warmed leather, clean sweat, and something indefinably him, was stronger here, a tangible presence in the still air. He was there. At the far end, near the stall of the Thessalian stallion, a single lantern hung from a hook, casting a warm, intimate pool of light that pushed back the moon-silvered shadows. He was checking the horse's hooves, his back to her, broad shoulders outlined against the lantern's glow. He wore only loose trousers and a thin, sleeveless tunic, the muscles of his back and arms moving fluidly with the task. The horse, Spirit, stood calm and trusting, a testament to the bond kaolin had forged. The quiet competence, the focused tenderness in his posture as he ran a hand down the stallion's leg. It was the same reverence he'd shown the desert bloom. It undid her anew. She must have made a sound, a catch of breath, the whisper of her shift against the doorframe. Or perhaps he simply felt the shift in the air, the sudden electric charge of her presence. He froze. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the horse's hoof. Spirit gave a soft nicker, sensing the tension. kaolin straightened, his back still to her for a long, agonizing moment. Then he turned. The lantern light caught his face. Shock widened his startling blue eyes, stripping away all pretense, all deference. His gaze swept over her, the bare feet on the stone floor, the thin shift clinging to her curves in the moonlight, the wild tumble of her dark hair freed from its severe coils. He saw the queen, yes, but stripped bare. He saw the woman who haunted his own forbidden thoughts. The raw vulnerability in her eyes mirrored his own, amplified 1,000-fold in this charged silence. I set no fret. His voice was a rasp, barely audible, her name falling from his lips like a prayer, a question, a plea. He didn't move, rooted to the spot, the lantern light gilding the planes of his face, the pulse hammering visibly in his throat. She couldn't speak. Words were useless currency here. The answer to his silent question wasn't in language. It was in her presence, in the tremulous defiance burning in her dark eyes, in the sheer terrifying fact of her standing there, in the stables, in the dead of night, wearing only moonlight and desperation. She took a step forward, then another, the cool stone beneath her feet, a stark contrast to the fire in her veins. The distance between them, measured in heartbeats, felt infinite, and yet non-existence. It wasn't banter, it was awe, thick with disbelief, and a dawning, overwhelming hope. He took a hesitant step towards her, then another, drawn like a moth to her flame. The lantern light now illuminated them both, casting their long, entwined shadows across the stable floor. I had to, she breathed, the words escaping on a tremor. Before, she couldn't say before you die. The thought was a physical pain. Before the dawn steals me away. He finished softly, his voice gaining strength, a current of understanding flowing between them. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body, to see the flecks of gold in the depths of his blue irises, the faint stubble dusting his jaw. His gaze traced the line of her collarbone, exposed by the shift, then returned to her eyes, holding hers captive. You risked everything. What is everything? She whispered, the defiance flickering brighter, when weighed against. Her hand lifted, trembling slightly, not quite daring to touch. Against this, she gestured weakly, encompassing the space between them, the years of stolen glances, the unbearable tension, the terrifying precipice they now stood upon. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, fleeting but devastating. Against the thorns, he murmured, echoing her warning in the garden. His own hand lifted, mirroring hers, hovering near her cheek. His calloused fingers, rough from reins and tools, seemed incongruous against the possibility of her skin. Even the most fiercely guarded bloom sometimes needs. He paused, searching for the word, his gaze intense. Needs the sun. Her breath hitched, the double meaning vibrated, a subtle, potent flirtation born of desperation and years of unspoken longing. And what if the sun burns it? She countered, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes locked on his. His gaze softened, filled with a tenderness that stole her breath. Then it burns gloriously, he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. For one moment of true warmth, it would be worth the ash. His hand finally, tentatively, brushed the curve of her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt that went straight to her core. It wasn't demanding, it was reverence, exploration. His thumb traced the high arch of her cheekbone, the pad rough yet incredibly gentle against her smooth skin. So soft, he breathed, wonder in his voice, like night itself given form.
The sensation was exquisite, overwhelming. The contrast, his weathered hand against her face, the simple roughness of his tunic against the thin silk of her shift, her deep rich skin against the sun-paled fairness of his arm, was a sensory poem written on her nerves. She leaned into his touch, a silent surrender that sent a shudder through him. Her own hand, emboldened, rose to touch his jaw. The strong line of bone beneath her fingertips, the unfamiliar texture of his fair stubble, it was a marvel, a forbidden territory finally explored. "And you," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion she could no longer contain, "you feel like daylight made solid." Her fingers traced the strong column of his throat, feeling the frantic pulse beneath her touch, a mirror to her own racing heart. Burning even now, he caught her wandering hand, pressing a kiss, fierce and tender, into her palm. The scrape of his stubble, the warmth of his lips, sent sparks dancing behind her eyes. "Only for you I set no fret," he vowed against her skin, his voice raw. "Only ever for you, in this shadowed place, you are my only son." He lifted his head, his eyes searching hers, the blue depths holding a universe of unspoken promises and shared peril. "One night," he whispered, the words heavy with fate, "before the storm, let us, have this." No more words were needed. The question in his eyes from the banquet hall was answered in the yielding of her body as she stepped fully into his embrace. His arms closed around her, strong and sure, pulling her against the solid warmth of his chest. She buried her face in the hollow of his neck, breathing in the scent of him, leather, horses, clean sweat, and the unique vital essence that was Kalen. His lips found her temple, her cheekbone, then finally, with agonizing slowness, her lips. The kiss wasn't fire, it was a fusion, a coming together of two starved souls, a sealing of a bond forged in silence and shattered resolve. It was deep, slow, and devastatingly tender, speaking volumes where words had failed. Her hands tangled in the sun-bleached silk of his hair, pulling him closer, while his hands roamed her back, learning the contours through the thin linen, his touch worshipful, igniting trails of liquid heat wherever they traveled. The lantern light painted them in gold and shadow, their embrace a silent, sacred language in the heart of the sleeping stable. The hayloft wasn't a bower fit for a queen. It was a realm of rough textures and sweet-smelling hay, bathed in the cool silver light pouring through a high, open window. Dust motes danced in the moonbeams like shy witnesses. They climbed the worn ladder, hands intertwined, the silence between them now charged with a different kind of tension, anticipation, reverence, the shared weight of the stolen moment. Here, amidst the scent of dried grasses and the distant murmur of the horses below, the last vestiges of rank dissolved. He was Kalen, she was Iset Nofret. The queen and the stablemaster were roles shed like old skins. He laid his rough-spun cloak on the hay, a makeshift bed. Moonlight spilled over them as they sank down, the hay whispering secrets beneath their weight. His touch as he slowly pushed the thin linen shift from her shoulders was a revelation. Calloused palms traced the elegant slope of her collarbones, the swell of her breasts, the dip of her waist, the curve of her hip. Every inch of skin was a new territory, mapped with trembling reverence. "Gods," he breathed, his voice thick with awe as the moonlight revealed her fully, her dark skin like polished obsidian against the pale gold hay. "You are beyond imagining, a desert goddess made flesh." His lips followed the path his hands had charted, kissing the hollow of her throat, the sensitive curve of her breast, the taut plane of her stomach. Each kiss was a brand, a silent vow of adoration. She gasped, arching into his touch, her own hands exploring the landscape of him, the hard planes of his chest, the powerful muscles of his arms and back, the surprising softness of the hair on his forearms. The contrast was intoxicating, her smooth darkness against his sun-kissed fairness, the silk of her skin against the rough texture of his work-hardened body. She traced the ridge of a scar on his shoulder, a silent question in her touch. "Battle," he murmured against her skin, his breath warm. "Long ago, in another life." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. You are my only reality now." His gaze met hers, intense in the moonlight. "Tell me this is real, Iset Nofret. Tell me I'm not dreaming beneath this desert moon." She reached up, framing his face with her hands, drawing him down for a deep, searing kiss. "More real than the crown," she whispered against his lips, the admission freeing something wild and desperate within her. "More real than stone walls or duty. You are the dream I never dared have, Kalen." Her hand slid down his back, urging him closer. "Make it real, burn with me." His restraint shattered. Their coming together was a silent conflagration, a culmination of every repressed glance, every stifled tremor, every moment of unbearable tension. It wasn't frantic passion, but a profound, wordless communion, a desperate sealing of their bond against the looming dawn and the specter of war. He moved within her with a slow, deep intensity that spoke of reverence and a shared, devastating understanding of the fragility of their time. Her body arched to meet his, not in conquest, but in surrender to a force far greater than her iron will, the terrifying, beautiful force of connection she had fought for so long. The moonlight bathed them, gilding sweat-slicked skin, highlighting the stark, beautiful contrast of their bodies entwined, queen and hidden prince, lost in a timeless moment where duty and rank dissolved into pure, unadulterated being. Every sigh, every shuddering breath, every shift of muscle against muscle was a language spoken only through sensation. The hay rustled softly beneath them, the only accompaniment to the symphony of their ragged breathing and pounding hearts. It was a claiming, a yielding, a desperate affirmation of life and feeling in the face of death. Afterwards, curled against the solid warmth of his chest, his arms holding her as if she was spun glass, I set no fret listened to the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath her ear. The frantic energy had subsided, replaced by a profound, terrifying peace. The scent of hay and their mingled sweat was earthy and real. His fingers traced idle, soothing patterns on her bare back, his lips occasionally brushing her hairline. The desert bloom she'd tucked behind her ear earlier lay crushed beside them, its fragrance mingling with the loft's aroma. She knew, with absolute certainty, that this changed everything. The careful architecture of her life lay in ruins. A new, terrifying vulnerability had taken root within her, intertwined with a fierce, protective love for the man holding her. He shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. Moonlight softened the angles of his face, his blue eyes dark pools reflecting the silver light and the depth of his emotion. He didn't speak. Instead, his gaze traced her features as if memorizing them, the curve of her brow, the fullness of her lips still swollen from his kisses, the elegant line of her neck. He reached out, gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear, his thumb lingering on her cheekbone. The tenderness in that simple gesture threatened to undo her completely. "I set no fret," he said finally, his voice low and rough with spent passion and unspoken fear. "When I ride out, don't," she whispered, pressing her fingers against his lips. She couldn't bear the farewells, the promises that might be broken by northern steel. "Not yet, just be here, now." He caught her hand, kissing her fingertips. "Now is all we have," he agreed, his voice thick. He pulled her closer, burying his face in the curve of her neck, breathing her in. "But know this," he murmured against her skin, the words vibrating through her. "Wherever I am, whatever happens, my heart remains here, with you, in this citadel of stone, and in this loft of hay." He pulled back slightly, his gaze locking onto hers, intense and unwavering. "I am Kalen, yes, stablemaster, but before exile, before the war that took my family and my name." He took a deep breath, the confession hanging heavy in the air. "I was Kalen, second son of King Theodoric of Valinor." He searched her face, perhaps for judgment, perhaps for understanding. A prince without a kingdom, a soldier bound for another king's war. But tonight, he cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "Tonight, I am simply yours." The revelation landed softly, not as a shock, but as a missing piece clicking into place. The quiet nobility, the ease with command, the hidden strength. It explained the conscription, it deepened the tragedy, it made the man before her even more heartbreakingly real. "Kalen," she breathed, testing the name. It suited him, strong, melodic, holding the echo of lost forests and northern skies. "My prince of haylofts and desert blooms," she added, a ghost of a smile touching her lips despite the tears pricking her eyes. The banter was fragile, laced with shared sorrow, but it was theirs. He huffed a soft, almost laugh, a sound of pure, surprised affection. "The only kingdom I desire," he whispered, leaning down to kiss her again, slow and deep, pouring all his fear, his hope, his impossible love into the connection, "is the one I hold in my arms tonight." They drifted in the fragile peace for precious, stolen hours, talking in hushed whispers about inconsequential things, the stars visible through the loft window, the personality of a particular mayor, the absurdity of court formalities, finding solace in the mundane, building a tiny shared world insulated from the dawn. He traced the lines of her palm, claiming it held the map of a great queen, and she countered that his calluses told the story of a prince who knew the earth. They shared sips of water from a canteen, the simple act feeling profoundly intimate. He wove a small, clumsy braid into her hair, using a strand of hay and a silken thread he found in the loft, his large fingers surprisingly gentle. She traced the northern constellations she knew on his bare chest, with her fingertip, naming them softly. It was a courtship compressed into moments, a lifetime of longing expressed in touches and shared breaths. But the desert night was relentless. The deep indigo outside the loft window began to soften, bleeding into the palest gray at the horizon. Dawn, the cold thief, was coming. The fragile peace shattered, replaced by a crushing sense of finality. He stirred first, his body tensing. He pressed a long, desperate kiss to her forehead, a vow, An apology, a farewell, all in one. I said no fret, he breathed, the name a caress and a wound. She clung to him, burying her face against his chest, inhaling his scent one last time, memorizing the feel of his skin, the beat of his heart. Come back, she whispered, the words raw, torn from her soul. Kaelin, promise me, come back. He didn't promise, they both knew the futility. Instead he held her tighter, his voice rough with unshed tears. If the gods are kind, if fate allows, I will cross deserts and battlefields to find my way back to this scent, he murmured, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the desert bloom and her own unique fragrance, to this warmth. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers, memorizing her face in the fading moonlight. Remember the sun, he whispered, touching the braid he'd made. Remember the burn. He dressed quickly, silently, the simple soldier's gear a stark contrast to the intimacy they had shared. She watched him, wrapped in his cloak now, her shift feeling flimsy armor against the coming desolation. He paused at the top of the ladder, looking back. The first true rays of dawn, cold and pale, crept through the window, catching the tears silently, tracking down her cheeks and the fierce, desperate love in his eyes. No more words. He touched his fingers to his lips, then extended his hand towards her, palm open, in a gesture of love and benediction. Then he was gone, descending the ladder, the sound of his footsteps fading into the waking sounds of the stables below. Icenofret remained on the bed of hay and cloak, the lingering warmth of his body, the only comfort against the invading chill of dawn. She placed a hand low on her abdomen, a strange, instinctive gesture. A secret, born of fire and moonlight, and desperate love, was already taking root. The desert bloom, crushed beside her, still released its fragile, resilient scent, a bittersweet promise in the cold, gray light. The world outside was waking to war. Her world, inside, was forever changed. The bond forged in silence, and a single stolen night, was now an unbreakable tether, carrying the terrifying, wondrous weight of a future heir, and a love that defied every boundary. The silence after his footsteps faded was the loudest sound she had ever heard.
Chapter 4. The Citadel, once a bastion of Icenofret's meticulously ordered control, echoed with a new kind of silence after Kaelin rode north with the dawn. It wasn't the quiet of contemplation or power, but the hollow resonance of profound absence. The familiar sense of sandalwood and cool stone now felt sterile, accusatory, a constant reminder of the vibrant, earthy aromas, sun-warmed leather, horses, clean sweat, the ghost of the desert bloom that had been violently ripped away. She watched the departing contingent from the highest tower, a statue carved from grief and granite, unseen. The sight of his fair head, a diminishing speck against the vast, unforgiving ochre of the desert, was a wound that bled cold fire into her soul. The citadel walls, once her fortress, now felt like the bars of a gilded cage, trapping a newly awakened, desperate creature within. The meticulously ordered Queen's Garden became a battleground. The cloying perfume of roses, once a symbol of cultivated beauty, now felt oppressive, a suffocating shroud. One morning, weeks after Kaelin's departure, Icenofret stood amidst the geometric beds, the scent thick enough to choke on. Her gaze fell upon the small patch of desert blooms. Resilient, defiant, they thrived despite the surrounding order. An impulse, sharp and uncharacteristic, seized her. Clear this quadrant, she commanded her head gardener, gesturing not to the desert blooms, but to a section of perfect blood-red roses. Replace them with these. She pointed to the spiky desert plants. The gardener gaped, horrified. But, Your Majesty, the symmetry, the tradition. Symmetry is overrated, Icenofret stated, her voice colder than the dawn air. Tradition can stifle. I wish to see resilience, wildness. Plant them. It was a small rebellion, a silent scream against the rigid confines of her life. As the gardeners worked, grumbling, uprooting the pristine roses to make way for the hardy, thorn-guarded desert stars, Icenofret felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. The garden, like her soul, would no longer be entirely tame. The hollow ache in the citadel mirrored the hollow ache within her, but it was soon filled insidiously and wondrously by a new presence. The signs were subtle at first, a heightened sensitivity to the smell of roasting meat that sent her rushing to the balcony for air, a profound weariness that sleep couldn't touch, a strange fluttering deep in her core that felt like trapped moonlight. Confirmation came from her physician, a discreet man bound by ancient oaths. His diagnosis was delivered with bowed head and hushed reverence. Your Majesty carries the royal heir. The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of terror and fierce protective joy through her. The heir, His heir, Kaelin's child, a secret taking root, a living testament to their single, stolen night. The fear was paralyzing: scandal, political upheaval, the vulnerability of carrying a life conceived in defiance of every boundary. But the joy was a warm, insistent tide, stronger than the fear. It manifested in unexpected ways. She found herself lingering in the stables, not to glimpse him, but to run her hand over the sleek neck of Spirit, the Thessalian stallion he had gentled. The horse would nuzzle her palm, its warm breath stirring the air, carrying faint echoes of leather and hay. She'd close her eyes, breathe deeply, and for a fleeting moment feel connected to the man who was now a phantom haunting the northern winds. "He trained you well, didn't he, Spirit?" she'd murmur, her voice softer than she used with any courtier. Patience and understanding, even for wild hearts. The horse would snort softly, as if in agreement. It was her secret banter with a ghost, shared with a beast who held his scent. Her rulings began to shift. Petitions from border villages facing drought, once met with pragmatic calculations of resource allocation, now received unexpected leniency. She ordered grain stores opened, wells deepened. When her vizier questioned the expense, citing potential future shortages, she fixed him with a gaze that had lost some of its glacial ice, replaced by a steely compassion. "Future shortages can be managed," she stated. "Starving children cannot. See it done." The vizier blinked, startled. This newfound empathy, radiating from the core of her burgeoning motherhood, puzzled and unsettled the court. The scent of sandalwood in her chambers was now often mingled with the faint, clean aroma of crushed herbs, mint, ginger, brought to soothe the tides of nausea. Her body softened, curves emerging where there had only been regal plains, a subtle radiance beneath the customary composure that baffled observers. She moved differently, a hand often resting unconsciously on the slight swell beneath her silks, a gesture both protective and wondrous. News from the north arrived sporadically, scrolls bearing the black seal of the northern commander. Eiston from it received them in her solar, the room where the desert bloom had once shattered her resolve. Now she sat at her ebony desk, the growing curve of her belly pressed against its edge. She would break the seal with hands that no longer trembled visibly, but her heart would hammer against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her eyes scanned the formal script, searching not for troop movements or supply lines, but for one name. Mentions of Kaelin, referred to by his birth title, Prince Kaelin of Valinor, a fact noted with silent intensity by the vizier, were sparse but vital. Performed with commendable valor at the Battle of Black Pass, minor injury sustained, recovering well, instrumental in securing the western flank. Each word was a lifeline, a flicker of hope in the consuming darkness of war. She would trace the letters of his name with a fingertip, whispering silent promises to the child stirring within her. "Your father lives. He fights. He is coming back to us." It was a fierce, silent conversation, a mother weaving tales of a heroic father for an unborn prince, her heart a battlefield of hope and dread. As her pregnancy advanced, the citadel itself seemed to breathe differently. The rebellion in the garden spread. Wild desert sage appeared among the myrtle hedges. Hardy, fragrant thyme spilled over the edges of the pristine quartz paths. The rigid symmetry softened, yielding to a more vibrant, resilient beauty. The scent on the evening air was no longer just roses, but a complex tapestry of wild herbs, sun-baked earth, and the resilient perfume of the desert blooms, which had multiplied under the now devoted care of the chastened gardener. It mirrored the unfurling within Nofret. The obsidian mask of the queen remained, necessary armor, but behind it the woman who had known fire and moonlight grew stronger, softer, irrevocably changed. She walked her transformed garden, the crunch of quartz beneath her sandals a familiar sound, her hand resting on the pronounced curve of her womb. The child was active now, tiny feet and elbows pressing against her from within, a constant, miraculous reminder of Kaelin. She'd smile faintly, a secret curve of the lips unseen by courtiers, whispering to the life within, "Restless today, little one, like your father, eager for the open sky?" Or sometimes teasingly, "Are you practicing your swordplay in there, or perhaps learning the gentler touch for a skittish horse?" It was her private dialogue, a blend of hope, love and bittersweet longing, filled with the ghost of Kaelin's quiet wit. Rumors, of course, swirled like desert dust devils. Whispers of divine favor, a miraculous conception by the sun god Raiji. Whispers of scandal, a secret lover among the gods, a visiting dignitary. The identity of the father was the court's favorite. Fevered speculation. Nofret moved through the storm with regal indifference. Her newfound radiance, the glow of impending motherhood mingled with the fierce love for the absent father, a shield against the pointed stares and hushed conversations. She felt Kaelin's presence in the child's movements, in the memory of his touch, in the scent of the wild herbs that now perfumed her sanctuary. He was woven into the very fabric of her being and the future of her kingdom. The birthing chamber was a realm of pain, effort, and primal power. The cool stones echoed with Nofret's guttural cries, the scent of blood and sweat,
and potent birthing herbs thick in the air. The midwives murmured encouragement, their hands skilled and sure. Through the haze of agony, Nefret clung to one image, Callion's face in the lantern light of the hayloft, his blue eyes holding hers, promising forever in a single night. She pushed, drawing on a wellspring of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The strength of a queen, yes, but more profoundly, the strength of a woman fighting to bring her love's child into the world. And then a final rending push, and the piercing, beautiful cry of new life filled the chamber. A son, placed on her heaving chest, slick and squalling, radiating furious, vital heat. Nefret looked down, tears blurring her vision. His skin was a breathtaking tapestry, the deep, rich warmth of her own, woven with the unmistakable golden undertones of his father. And when his eyes, screwed shut against the sudden light, finally opened, blinking and unfocused, they were the startling clear blue of a desert oasis sky. Callion's eyes. A sob tore from her throat, a sound of pure, agonized joy. "My son," she whispered, her voice raw with exhaustion and overwhelming love. "My beautiful, impossible son." She traced the curve of his tiny ear, the downy hair that hinted at a blend of dark and light. "You have your father's eyes, little hawk," she murmured, a tear slipping onto his forehead. "And his stubborn spirit, I suspect." She kissed the impossibly soft skin, breathing in the milky newborn scent of him, a scent that instantly became the axis of her world. "Welcome, Prince Amun Kalan." She had chosen the name weeks ago. Amun for the kingdom's patron god, Kalan for the prince who had gifted her this miracle. Weeks bled into months. The citadel hummed with the new, demanding rhythm of an heir. Amun Kalan thrived, a vibrant, curious infant whose startling blue eyes missed nothing. Nefret's solar became a nursery by day, filled with the soft gurgles and coos of the prince, the scent of milk and talcum powder mingling with sandalwood and wild herbs. She ruled from a low divan near the window, the baby often cradled in one arm while she reviewed scrolls with the other. The fierce protectiveness she felt was a constant hum, a new layer to her authority. One afternoon, as she traced the intricate border of a trade agreement, Amun Kalan grabbed her stylus with a determined fist. She chuckled, a low, warm sound rarely heard before. "Ambitious already, little prince," she teased, gently prying his tiny fingers loose. "Planning to rewrite the tax codes, or perhaps design stables fit for mythical beasts?" She booped his nose lightly. "Your father would approve of the latter." The baby gurgled, kicking his legs, his bright eyes fixed on her face. "Yes," she murmured, her voice softening. "He would. He'd lift you high and show you the horses, tell you stories of northern stars." The familiar ache of Kalan's absence was there, but it was woven now with the golden thread of his living legacy in her arms. Then, the news arrived. Not a scroll, but a herald, breathless and dust-streaked, bursting into the outer chamber during a quiet moment while Nefret rocked Amun Kalan. "Victory, your majesty. Decisive victory in the north. The enemy is routed. Our forces, they are returning." The words hung in the air. Nefret froze, her arms tightening instinctively around her son. "Returning," the herald continued, listing commanders, describing battles, but she heard only one thing beneath the words. He might be coming home. The wait was an exquisite torture. Days stretched, each sunset a taunt. Nefret walked the transformed garden. Amun Kalan cradled against her shoulder, wrapped in fine linen the color of desert sand. The wild blooms and herbs were in full glory, a vibrant tapestry under the sun. The air hummed with bees and the clean, resilient scent of the desert flowers she loved. The rigid order of before was now a memory. This was a garden alive, breathing, resilient, like her. She stood near the patch of desert blooms, now a thriving cluster, their tiny star-shaped flowers defiantly beautiful. Amun Kalan stirred, his bright blue eyes wide, taking in the shifting light and color. She adjusted him, whispering, "Look, little hawk, the flowers your father tended, the ones he sent to me, before the storm." She touched a petal gently. He saw their beauty, their strength, just as he saw. Her voice caught. She couldn't finish, just as he saw mine. Then, a commotion at the northern gates, shouts, the clatter of hooves on stone, the unmistakable sound of returning men.
Nefret's heart stopped, then slammed against her ribs. She didn't run. A queen did not run. But she turned, slowly, deliberately, towards the entrance to the garden, her son held close, a shield and a beacon. He appeared in the arched gateway, framed by the sandstone. Sunlight blazed behind him, outlining his figure. He was thinner, harder, the planes of his face sharper beneath the dust, and the fair stubble, a fresh scar, a pale line, bisected his left eyebrow. He wore the practical gear of a soldier returned, leather-worn and travel-stained. But his eyes scanned the garden frantically, desperately, until they found her. Kalan stopped dead. The breath left his body in a visible rush. He looked shattered, worn down by war, haunted by distance and fear. His gaze locked onto hers, then dropped, incredulous, to the bundle in her arms. The color of the child's skin, the shock of dark hair, and most of all, the wide, curious blue eyes, staring back at him, his own eyes reflected in miniature. Time suspended. The garden held its breath. The scent of the desert blooms enveloped them, pure and potent. I set no fret, took a step forward, then another. Her pace quickened, driven by a force stronger than regal dignity. Kalen mirrored her, stumbling slightly in his haste, his eyes never leaving her face, then the baby, then her face again, disbelief warring with dawning, overwhelming joy. They met in the center of the wild garden, amidst the thyme and sage and defiant desert stars. No words, none could bridge the chasm of war and waiting, of fear and desperate hope. I set no fret, lifted her face to his. He smelled of dust, horse, sweat, and the sharp, clean scent of the northern pines he must have passed through. It was the scent of survival, of homecoming. His hands, calloused and scarred now, came up trembling, not to take the child, but to frame her face. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, tracing paths worn by hidden tears. His blue eyes, older, warier, but alight with an intensity that stole her breath, searched hers. I set no fret. He breathed, her name a broken prayer on his lips. You lived. A ghost of her old defiance, softened by joy, flickered in her eyes. Did you doubt the resilience of a desert bloom, Prince of Haylofts? She whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Or the fury of a queen protecting her cub? A choked sound, half laugh, half sob escaped him. He leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her skin, his shoulders shaking. Never, not for a moment. His gaze dropped again to the baby, who stared back with solemn, curious blue eyes. The question hung, fragile in the fragrant air. Callan, I set Nefret said softly, shifting the baby slightly, so Callan could see him fully. Your son. Callan's face crumpled, tears unchecked, tracked through the dust on his cheeks. Reverently, almost fearfully, he reached out one large battle-worn hand. His fingertip, rough and scarred, touched the impossibly soft curve of his son's cheek. Callan blinked, then astonishingly, grasped Callan's calloused finger in his tiny, perfect fist. Callan gasped, a sound of pure wonder. He looked at Iset Nefret, his eyes shining with tears and a love so profound it seemed to radiate from him. He has your strength, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion, and your impossible beauty. And your eyes, Callan, she whispered, stepping closer until they were a triad, bound by an invisible, unbreakable cord. He has your eyes, the color of a promise kept. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, the baby safe between them. The scent of the desert blooms, Callan's travel dust and pine, the milky sweetness of their son. It was the scent of a world remade. Callan wrapped his arms around them both, holding his world, the queen, the prince, the miracle born of fire and moonlight, against his heart. He pressed a kiss, fierce and tender, onto Iset Nefret's hair, then bent to gently kiss his son's forehead. My son, he breathed against her skin. My stars. He looked out over the garden, no longer a symbol of rigid control, but a testament to wild, resilient love. My unfurling world, their bond, forged in forbidden glances, shattered resolve, a single night of fire, and the long, aching weight was palpable in the circle of their embrace. It was written in the contrast of her dark skin, against his sun-paled, battle-worn arm, in the tiny fist clutching his father's finger, in the shared blue eyes of father and son. The silence that fell then wasn't hollow, but profound, filled with the beating of three hearts, the scent of wild blooms under the desert sun, and the quiet, earth-shattering certainty of a love that had reshaped a queen, redeemed a prince, and birthed the future. The citadel walls still stood, but the world within, and the world yet to come, had irrevocably, beautifully bloomed.